Right now, in water treatment plants, power facilities, and local government offices across the United States, there are pieces of industrial equipment that Iranian government hackers have already broken into, already manipulated, and already used to cause real operational damage. And just days ago, the agency responsible for protecting America's infrastructure had to go back and admit the problem is worse and spreading to more equipment than they originally told the public. This is the story of the warning nobody outside cybersecurity circles is talking about, and why it should genuinely concern anyone who depends on the American power grid, which is to say, basically everyone. Let's start with how this entire situation began, because it didn't come out of nowhere. It's directly tied to the war that erupted between the United States, Israel, and Iran back in late February of this year. Almost as soon as that conflict started, according to reporting from Cybersecurity Dive, Iran-linked threat actors began targeting critical infrastructure, not just inside Iran and Israel, but across the Persian Gulf region and directly inside the United States as well. This wasn't a slow, gradual buildup. It escalated quickly and deliberately, and by April, it had become serious enough that multiple federal agencies felt compelled to issue a joint public warning. On April 7th, according to reporting from Eichen Gump and confirmed directly by CISA's own published advisory, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, working together with the FBI, the National Security Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Energy, published a joint cybersecurity advisory with a title that doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Iranian-affiliated cyber actors exploit programmable logic controllers across U.S. critical infrastructure. Let's break down exactly what that means, because the specific target here matters enormously. Programmable logic controllers, or PLCs, are small, specialized computers that control physical industrial equipment in the real world. They're the devices that open and close valves at water treatment plants, that regulate machinery on factory floors, that manage the physical processes keeping power flowing through the electrical grid. They're not abstract data sitting in some cloud server somewhere. They're the actual bridge between digital commands and physical machinery, meaning if someone hostile gains control of a PLC, they're not just stealing information. They're potentially gaining the ability to physically manipulate real equipment that could be responsible for treating your drinking water or keeping your local power grid stable. According to CISA's own advisory, published directly on the agency's website, this wasn't some abstract theoretical threat being flagged as a precaution. The advisory stated clearly that Iranian-affiliated activity had already disrupted PLCs across several U.S. critical infrastructure sectors, specifically by attempting to download malicious project files and manipulate data on human-machine interface and supervisory control and data acquisition displays. The screens operators actually look at to monitor and control these physical systems. According to the advisory's own language, this activity had already resulted in real operational disruption and financial loss for the organizations affected. Let's sit with that for a second, because it's easy to read past a sentence like that without fully processing what it actually means. This isn't a warning about hackers who might someday try something. This is federal agencies confirming that Iranian government-affiliated hackers had already successfully broken into American industrial control systems, had already manipulated the actual displays operators use to monitor critical infrastructure, and had already caused real, measurable financial and operational damage before the warning was even published. Now let's talk about exactly which sectors were hit, because the specific list reveals just how broad and how sensitive this targeting campaign actually was. According to reporting from Utility Dive, the advisory went out specifically to the energy sector, along with water and wastewater systems, and government services and facilities, including local municipalities. Think about what that combination actually covers. Not one narrow, specialized target, the literal systems that keep water flowing to homes, that keep electricity running through the grid, and that keep basic local government operations functioning. According to that same reporting, CISA specifically stated that Iranian-affiliated advanced persistent threat targeting campaigns against U.S. organizations had recently escalated, and explicitly connected that escalation directly to the ongoing hostilities between the United States and Iran. Let's talk about the timing here too, because it wasn't coincidental. According to Utility Dive's reporting, the specific advisory went out as the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran entered its 6th week, meaning this wasn't some background, ongoing threat unrelated to current events. It was a direct, real-time consequence of the shooting war happening simultaneously across the Middle East, extending into American infrastructure as an entirely separate front of that same broader conflict. In response to this specific warning, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the organization specifically responsible for the reliability of the entire North American electrical grid, confirmed publicly that it was actively monitoring the grid and coordinating directly with the U.S. Department of Energy and the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. essentially confirming that this threat was being taken seriously enough to trigger direct, active coordination at the highest levels of America's electrical infrastructure oversight. Now here's where this story becomes genuinely current and genuinely urgent, rather than just a look back at something that happened months ago. According to CISA's own official advisory page, this warning wasn't a one-time announcement that quietly faded away after its initial publication back in April. It was formally updated on July 22nd, just days ago as of this recording, with new, expanded guidance. And the update itself tells you something important about how this threat has evolved since it was first identified. According to the updated advisory, the authoring agencies added new guidance specifically for detecting malicious changes hidden within reusable code modules used inside Rockwell Automation PLC programs, a genuinely sophisticated detail that reveals just how deeply embedded this hacking campaign had become. Instead of simply breaking into a system and causing obvious, immediate damage, these hackers had apparently been burying malicious modifications inside reusable code components, the kind of code that gets copied and reused across multiple different systems and facilities, meaning a single compromised code module could potentially spread its malicious changes across numerous separate installations without each one being individually directly hacked. But here's the detail that should genuinely concern you the most, because it shows this threat isn't shrinking, it's expanding. According to that same July update, confirmed directly by CISA's own advisory, the agency specifically expanded the manufacturer's scope of this warning to include observed targeting of Schneider Electric and Siemens equipment, in addition to the Rockwell Automation devices originally flagged back in April, along with a note that other manufacturers' equipment may potentially be affected as well. Schneider Electric and Siemens aren't obscure niche manufacturers. They're two of the largest, most widely used industrial control system manufacturers in the entire world, embedded in critical infrastructure across countless facilities throughout the United States and internationally. If Iranian-affiliated hackers have expanded their targeting to include equipment from these two additional major manufacturers, that represents a meaningful, documented escalation in the scope of this entire campaign, not a resolution or a winding down of the original threat. Let's talk about who's actually believed to be behind this campaign, because understanding the specific actors involved helps put this threat into proper context. According to detailed analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the group thought to be responsible for these specific attacks calls itself cyberattacks. On the surface, this group presents itself publicly as a hacktivist organization, the kind of loosely organized, ideologically motivated group that claims responsibility for attacks as a form of political protest rather than formal state action. But according to that same CSIS analysis, cyberattacks is actually believed to be an advanced persistent threat group directly associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Cyber Electronic Command, meaning this isn't some independent, loosely affiliated group of ideologically motivated hackers acting on their own initiative. It's widely assessed to be a formal extension of Iran's own military intelligence and cyber warfare apparatus, operating under a hacktivist front, specifically to maintain a degree of public deniability. That same CSIS analysis includes an important, genuinely useful piece of context worth understanding as well. It notes that this specific group has a documented history of overinflating its own attacks and their actual impact, specifically as part of a broader strategy to sow discord and generate fear that may exceed the group's actual real-world operational capability at any given moment. That's a genuinely important, balanced point to include here, because it means, while this threat is absolutely real, confirmed directly by CISA's own official advisories and updates, the psychological impact this group aims for through public messaging and propaganda may sometimes exceed the precise technical scope of what they've actually managed to compromise at any specific moment. But even accounting for that healthy skepticism about propaganda inflation, the underlying technical activity here has real history and real precedent, according to that same CSIS analysis. Iran has a documented track record, stretching back over a decade of specifically targeting American operational technology and critical infrastructure. As far back as 2013, Iranian hackers successfully accessed the control systems of a small dam located just outside New York City, an incident that, according to that CSIS report, thankfully had minimal actual operational impact at the time, but demonstrated the underlying capability and intent even then. That same broader campaign also involved Iranian hackers accessing the systems and internal data of Calpine Corporation, one of California's largest power producers, showing that targeting America's energy infrastructure specifically has been a consistent, long-term Iranian strategic priority stretching back more than a decade, not some brand new tactic invented specifically for this current war. There's also a more recent, directly comparable precedent worth understanding here, because it shows exactly how these specific attack methods typically play out once they succeed. According to that same CSIS analysis, The current campaign bears genuine similarities to a documented Iran-linked cyber attack against U.S. water facilities back in November of 2023, one that specifically targeted a programmable logic controller manufactured by an Israeli company called Unitronics. In that specific 2023 incident, the hackers didn't just quietly manipulate the system's data. They digitally defaced the actual equipment interface itself, setting the display screens to openly show the message, "You have been hacked, down with Israel," for facility operators to see directly on their own control panels. That earlier incident gives you a genuinely concrete, real-world example of exactly how this kind of intrusion actually looks and feels once it's successfully carried out, moving from an abstract cybersecurity warning into something a real facility operator can see with their own eyes on their own control screens. Let's also talk about the broader pattern of Iranian cyber activity happening simultaneously alongside this specific PLC-focused campaign, because it wasn't happening in isolation. According to reporting from Cybersecurity Dive, Iran-linked threat actors have targeted numerous critical infrastructure targets, not just inside the United States, but across Israel and the broader Persian Gulf region as well since the war began in late February. That same reporting specifically mentions that Stryker, a major American medical technology provider, was separately attacked back in March, after hackers manipulated the company's Microsoft Intune environment, an incident that led to brief but real disruptions of the company's manufacturing, ordering, and shipping capabilities. That's a completely separate company from the water, energy, and government sectors specifically named in the CISA advisory, showing that this broader campaign of Iranian-affiliated cyber activity was casting a genuinely wide net across multiple different American industries throughout this same general period, not narrowly confined to just the specific sectors CISA formally warned about. Now let's talk about what CISA and its partner agencies are actually recommending organizations do in response to this ongoing updated threat, because understanding the practical response helps contextualize just how seriously this is being treated at the operational level. According to Aiken Gump's summary of the original advisory, the core recommendations center on three main areas. First, limiting access to these programmable logic controllers directly from the internet, since much of this exploitation activity specifically relies on finding internet-facing devices that shouldn't have been publicly accessible in the first place. Second, reviewing available system logs, specifically for suspicious traffic patterns matching the indicators of compromise the agencies provided directly in the advisory. And third, hardening the affected devices themselves against exactly the kind of intrusion techniques these Iranian-affiliated actors have been documented using. According to the July update specifically, that guidance has now expanded even further, adding new recommendations for detecting malicious changes hidden within reusable code modules, along with what the advisory describes as best practice resources for securely deploying these devices going forward. The fact that federal agencies felt it necessary to issue this kind of expanded, more detailed technical guidance months after the original warning tells you something important. This isn't a threat that got successfully contained and resolved back in April. It's one that required additional monitoring, additional analysis, and additional public guidance as recently as this past week, because the underlying activity has continued evolving in ways serious enough to warrant a formal published update. Let's zoom out and talk about why this specific kind of threat matters so much more than a typical data breach or cybersecurity incident you might read about affecting some private company. When hackers breach a company's customer database, the consequences, while genuinely serious, are usually contained to stolen personal information, financial fraud risk, and reputational damage. But when hackers gain the ability to manipulate the actual programmable logic, controllers running water treatment plants and energy infrastructure, the potential consequences extend into the physical world in ways that go well beyond data theft. A compromised PLC at a water treatment facility could theoretically be used to manipulate chemical dosing processes. A compromised PLC connected to elements of the electrical grid could theoretically be used to cause operational disruptions, affecting how power actually flows to homes and businesses. CISA's own advisory language describing operational disruption and financial loss that has already occurred confirms this isn't a purely theoretical worst-case scenario being floated for dramatic effect. It's describing documented, already realized consequences from this specific campaign. Now, it's genuinely important to maintain a sense of proportion here too, because sensationalizing this threat beyond what the actual evidence supports wouldn't serve anyone well. The 2013 dam intrusion, according to CSIS's own assessment, had minimal actual operational impact despite the successful breach itself. And CSIS specifically noted cyber-Avthinger's documented history of inflating the perceived impact of their attacks beyond their actual technical scope. So the honest, complete picture here isn't necessarily one of Iranian hackers currently holding direct catastrophic control over America's entire power grid at this very moment. It's a picture of a persistent, evolving, genuinely real campaign of intrusion and disruption attempts targeting America's critical infrastructure, one that federal agencies have confirmed has already caused real operational and financial damage in specific documented instances, and one that continues actively evolving and expanding its scope as recently as this past week's official update. Let's talk about what this all means for ordinary Americans who aren't cybersecurity professionals or infrastructure operators, because ultimately, that's who this story actually affects most directly. Most people never think about the programmable logic controllers running their local water treatment plant or regional power substation. These systems are designed specifically to be invisible, quietly doing their job in the background so reliably that nobody has to think about them at all. But that same invisibility, the fact that these systems operate so far behind the scenes that most people don't even know they exist, is exactly what makes a warning like this one so genuinely important to understand, even for people with no technical background whatsoever. The infrastructure keeping your water clean and your lights on isn't some abstract, untouchable system existing in some separate, protected digital universe. It's running on real computers, made by real manufacturers like Rockwell Automation, Schneider Electric, and Siemens, computers that, according to confirmed federal government reporting, foreign government-affiliated hackers have already successfully breached and manipulated in documented real instances. So where does this leave things right now, as of the most recent information available? The joint advisory from CISA, the FBI, the NSA, the EPA, and the Department of Energy remains active and continues being updated, with the most recent revision coming just days ago on July 22nd, expanding both the technical guidance for detection and the scope of manufacturers known to be affected. Iranian-affiliated hackers, believed to operate under the Cyberattacks banner as part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Cyber Electronic Command, continue targeting American water, energy, and government infrastructure as part of a broader, ongoing campaign directly connected to the larger conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. And federal agencies continue actively monitoring, coordinating, and issuing updated public guidance, specifically because this threat has not been fully resolved or contained, but rather continues evolving in ways serious enough to warrant continued active federal attention months after the original warning was first published. That's really the core truth sitting underneath this entire story. This isn't a warning from months ago that's already old news, safely resolved and filed away. It's an active, ongoing, officially confirmed campaign of foreign government-affiliated hacking, targeting the literal infrastructure keeping American water and power running. One serious enough that the federal government felt compelled to go back and update its public warning just this past week, expanding both the scope of what's being targeted and the guidance being offered to protect against it. If this story raised as many questions for you as it did for me while putting it together, drop a comment below and let me know what you think should happen next in response to this ongoing threat. Do you believe American critical infrastructure operators are moving fast enough to actually secure these systems? Or do you think this kind of warning tends to get lost in the news cycle before the underlying vulnerabilities actually get fixed? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your honest take on this one. And if you found this breakdown valuable, share it with someone who needs to understand just how real and how current this threat to America's own infrastructure actually is. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update the moment new developments come out on this story, because based on everything we just covered, this is very much still an active, ongoing situation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.